What if the deadliest planet in the galaxy became the ultimate testing ground for strength? When a Zari Elite Hunter tracking an anomaly discovered a human surviving the impossible, she learned that true power comes in forms she never imagined. How could a supposedly weak species outlast what killed even the mightiest warriors? The answer will change everything. I've been hunting on Meyhara IX for decades. There isn't a creature on this forsaken rock that I haven't tracked, killed, or studied. As the highest-ranking warrior of the Zari clan, I've mastered every terrain from the acid flats to the magnetic storm forests. But today, something's different. My bioscanner picked up an anomalous life sign at the edge of the Shattered Valley, a region so hostile that even the indigenous predators avoid it. At first, I assumed it was a glitch. Nothing survives in that hellscape except for the silicate scavengers that feed on thermal vents. I tracked the signal anyway. A warrior never ignores potential threats, especially on a death world like Meyhara. The atmospheric conditions worsened as I approached the coordinates. Red lightning split the sky, illuminating clouds of toxic particulates that would dissolve unprotected flesh in seconds. My exo-armor's filters strained against the onslaught status indicators, flashing warnings I'd long since learned to ignore. When you've survived 3 planetary cataclysms, alarm systems become background noise. The signal grew stronger as I crested a ridge of crystallized magma. Below me stretched a landscape that would terrify most sentient species, a maze of jagged obsidian spires jutting from pools of caustic liquid that bubbled and spat. And there, in the heart of it all, was something impossible. A human. Not just any human, a lone male sitting calmly on an outcropping of stone, tending to what appeared to be a makeshift shelter. His exposed skin was a map of scars, some fresh others faded to silver. He wore a patchwork of salvaged materials, rather than the standard-issue exosuits I'd seen on other human explorers. Most shocking of all, he wasn't dead. Humans are classified as soft bodies in the Galactic Codex, a species from a placid, temperate world with gravity barely worth mentioning. Their skin tears easily, their bones snap under modest pressure, and their respiratory systems fail in anything but the most favorable atmospheric conditions. Yet here one sat, surviving in conditions that would kill most armored elites of my own species within hours. I shifted position to get a clearer view, dislodging a small cascade of stones. The human's head snapped up instantly, eyes focusing precisely on my position despite my active camouflage. I'd encountered apex predators with slower reflexes. "You may as well come out," he called, his voice surprisingly steady despite the caustic atmosphere. "If you wanted me dead, I'd be dead already." I deactivated my camouflage and descended the ridge, weapons ready, but not aimed directly at him. A curious approach for me. I typically shoot first when encountering unknowns on Meyhara. Something about his composure gave me pause. "You're trespassing on restricted territory," I said in Standard Galactic, activating my external speakers. "This planet is classified Omega-7. No human clearance exists for Meyhara IX." He smiled, then a small, wry expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Funny thing about being stranded, you don't get much choice in the landing zone." As I moved closer, I noticed more details. His shelter was ingeniously constructed from what appeared to be the remnants of a crashed scout ship, but reinforced with indigenous materials, crystalline structures that naturally repelled the caustic atmosphere. Clever adaptation. "How long have you been here?" I demanded. He glanced at a crude marking system etched into the rock beside him. 643 local days, give or take. I couldn't hide my shock. Impossible. No human has survived more than a week on this planet. "You're not the first thing that's tried to kill me today," he replied, turning back to his work, sealing a container of what appeared to be purified water. "Or the first to tell me I should be dead." Something in his tone, resignation mixed with defiance, sparked an unfamiliar feeling in me. I'd spent centuries believing humans were weaklings, unworthy prey, hardly even worth studying. Yet this one had not only survived Meyhara, but seemed to have adapted to it. "I am Kael'Zari, Elite Hunter of the Zari Dominion," I announced, more from habit than necessity. "Dane Riker," he replied without looking up. "Former Terran Deep Space Corps, currently unemployed." The casual humor was unexpected. Most species become reverent or terrified when they learn they're speaking to a Zari elite. "Prove it," I said suddenly. He looked up. "Prove what?" Prove you've survived here. Anyone can huddle in a shelter for a few days. Show me you understand Meyhara. He seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded and stood. Follow me then, but stay close. The hunting packs are active this time of day. Hunting packs, I've cataloged every predator species on this planet, and none of them hunt in packs. Before I could voice this thought, a small device on his wrist beeped softly. A female voice emerged from it, artificial but with distinct personality. Dane, are you seriously taking a stroll with the alien assassin? Because that seems like a wonderful idea. Truly inspired decision-making. She's not an assassin, Juno, he replied to the device. Just curious. She's Zari, the AI continued. The same species that considers humans barely evolved apes according to their xenobiology database, which for the record I hacked while you were playing the strong silent type. I bristled at the intrusion. Your AI has overstepped. Save it, Dane interrupted. Juno's all I've had for company for over a year. She's protective. I'm pragmatic, the AI corrected. There's a difference. As we moved away from his shelter, I noticed how he navigated the treacherous terrain, not with the cautious steps of a visitor, but with the confidence of someone who had mapped every hazard. He avoided certain rocks without looking, stepped precisely in specific places, and kept us downwind of something I couldn't yet sense. The atmosphere here changes composition every few hours, he explained, gesturing to the sky. See how the clouds are shifting from red to amber. When they hit that bright orange color, the air becomes saturated with chlorine compounds. Your suit probably filters it, but for me, he tapped a crude breather mask hanging around his neck. It's a death sentence without preparation. He knew more about Meyhara's atmospheric cycles than many of our scientific outposts. I found myself reluctantly impressed. We reached a ridge overlooking a vast depression in the landscape. Below us, crystalline formations had created a natural amphitheater, and within it moved creatures I'd never documented, massive serpentine forms that communicated through subsonic rumbles I could feel through my armor. I call them earthshakers, Dane said quietly. They're normally solitary, but during the third moon's zenith, they gather like this. I think it's some kind of mating ritual. Impossible, I whispered. I've studied every life form on this planet. No offense, but you, Zari, tend to stick to the established territories. These creatures live deep underground most of the year. They only surface during specific atmospheric conditions. As if to prove his point, one of the massive creatures rose up, revealing a length easily 3 times that of my ship. It was magnificent and terrifying scales that shifted color like oil on water, sensory appendages that tasted the toxic air. How did you discover them? I asked, unable to hide my fascination. I fell into one of their tunnels during my 3rd week here. Instead of eating me, it studied me, then led me back to the surface through a safer route than I'd have found on my own. They're sentient, in their way, not like us, but... He paused, searching for words. They understand more than you'd expect. They remember faces, hold grudges, show mercy sometimes. Just then, the largest of the creatures turned its massive sensory array toward our position. I instinctively reached for my weapon, but Dane placed a hand on my arm the first time he'd touched me. Don't move, he whispered. It remembers me, but you're new, let it get your scent. The creature's senses extended toward us, undulating in the toxic breeze. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, it made a low, resonant sound that I felt in my chest cavity, even through my armor. It's accepting you, Dane explained. As long as you're with me, they won't attack. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This human hadn't just survived Meyhara, he'd formed relationships with its most dangerous inhabitants. He'd done something no Zari explorer had accomplished in centuries of studying this planet. As we watched the creature's elaborate dance, a storm front approached from the west, a wall of crackling energy and swirling toxins that would scour the landscape clean. We need to move, I said, survival instincts kicking in. That front will hit in 10 minutes. Dane nodded but didn't seem concerned. There's a cave system 200 meters north. It'll provide shelter. He led the way with such confidence that I found myself following without question, an unprecedented situation for a Zari Elite. The storm advanced faster than I'd calculated, toxic particulates already beginning to sting even through my filtration systems. "Run," I commanded, breaking into a sprint. Dane matched my pace, which should have been impossible for a human on a high-gravity world with such toxic atmosphere. As we reached the cave entrance, the storm front was nearly upon us. A violent updraft caught me off guard, throwing me off balance at the crucial moment. I felt my footing slip at the cave's edge, a potentially fatal mistake on Meyhara, where even a minor fall can expose you to concentrated toxins or predators. In that moment of vulnerability, I expected to die, or at least to fight my way back to safety alone. Instead, I felt a strong grip on my armor's shoulder joint, yanking me forward into the safety of the cave as the storm howled past the entrance. Dane Riker had just saved my life. A human had saved a Zari Elite. As the reality of this sank in, he casually checked his makeshift environmental sensors, seemingly unaware of how profoundly he'd just violated my understanding of the universe. "Storm's a bad one," he commented. "We'll be here at least 3 hours. Hope you're not in a hurry." I stared at him, reassessing everything I thought I knew about humans, about strength, about adaptation. "Why did you do that?" I finally asked. "Do what?" "Save me. I'm Zari. My people have hunted yours for sport." He shrugged, the motion oddly elegant despite his patchwork survival gear. "You're the first person I've talked to in almost 2 years. Seemed a waste to let you die within the first hour." His AI Juno chimed in from his wrist device. "What Dane means is that despite being a reckless idiot with a savior complex, he's still human enough to care about life, even yours. It's their most annoying quality." For the first time in centuries, I found myself speechless. Everything I'd been taught about humans, their weakness, their fragility, their inferiority, was being systematically dismantled by this single specimen, who not only survived, but thrived in conditions that challenged even me. As we settled in to wait out the storm, I realized something disturbing. I wasn't just impressed by this human. I was fascinated by him. The cave we sheltered in wasn't natural. As my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I realized the walls were too uniform, the ceiling too perfectly arched. The floor beneath us had subtle patterns etched into its surface, geometric designs that pulsed faintly with bioluminescence. "You've been busy," I observed, running my hand along a wall lined with intricate carvings. Dane shook his head. "I didn't make this place. It was here long before either of our species evolved." "Impossible," I said automatically, though I was beginning to tire of using that word. "Meyhara has no record of advanced civilization." "Your records are incomplete," he replied, simply activating a small light source that cast the cave in a pale blue glow. The illumination revealed the true scope of our shelter, not just a cove, but a vast chamber extending deep into the mountain, its walls covered in symbols unlike any language I'd encountered in my centuries of exploration. "I've been translating bits and pieces," Dane explained, gesturing to a section where he'd set up a crude workstation. "Whatever built this place, they understood Meyhara's cycles. Not just the weather patterns, but deeper rhythms, geological, astronomical. They knew this planet wasn't always a death world." I approached his workstation, curiosity overriding caution. Scattered across the surface were hand-drawn maps, journals filled with observations and fragments of technology I couldn't immediately identify. "You've been studying them," I said, not bothering to hide my surprise. "Not much else to do when you're stranded on a planet that wants to kill you every minute of every day," he replied with that same wry smile. "Besides understanding this place is the only way I've stayed alive." Juno's voice chimed in from his wrist device. "What Dane isn't telling you is that he was a xenoarchaeologist before joining the Deep Space Corps. This is actually his idea of a vacation." I glanced at Dane, who shrugged. "Academia got boring. Who wanted to see things firsthand." "So you crashed on purpose?" I asked incredulously. "No," he said, his expression darkening for the first time. "That part wasn't planned." He turned away, busying himself with checking his equipment, but I caught a glimpse of something I recognized all too well, the haunted look of a survivor bearing the weight of those who didn't make it. "You weren't alone when you arrived," I stated rather than asked. After a long pause, he nodded. "Survey team, 7 of us. Standard exploratory mission at the edge of charted space." "What happened?" "We picked up a distress signal. Another ship supposedly damaged and stranded in Meyhara's orbit. When we moved in to assist," he trailed off, jaw tightening. Ambush. Our engines were crippled, navigation systems fried. We had no choice but to attempt an emergency landing. Pirates, I asked, familiar with the tactic. Something worse. They weren't after our cargo or our ship. They wanted test subjects. His voice had gone flat clinical. There's a research consortium that pays premium for specimens from uncharted death worlds. Meyhara's at the top of their acquisition list. I felt a chill, despite my armor's temperature regulation. I knew it of such operations, black market research facilities that operated beyond the reach of galactic law, conducting experiments too horrific to be sanctioned. Your crew, 4 died in the crash. The other 2, he closed his eyes briefly. They survived long enough to be collected. The implication was clear. They'd been taken by the very predators who'd lured them into the trap. And you, I was thrown clear during final descent. By the time I regained consciousness, the scavengers had already taken my crewmates and stripped the ship for parts. All I had left was Juno's damaged core unit and whatever I could salvage before the local wildlife got curious. As if summoned by her name, Juno's voice softened. I was offline for 3 days. When Dane got me running again, he'd already established this shelter and begun mapping the immediate area, with a broken leg and second-degree burns over 40% of his body. I studied Dane with new understanding. His survival wasn't just impressive, it was nearly miraculous. And yet he spoke about it as if it were simply what anyone would do. Your species isn't known for this kind of resilience, I said finally. He looked up, meeting my gaze directly. Maybe you don't know my species as well as you think. The storm outside intensified, sending vibrations through the ancient structure. A particularly violent gust caused some debris to shift near the entrance, partially blocking our way out. We should clear that, I said, moving toward the opening. Wait, Dane's voice was sharp with urgency. He pulled something from his pocket, a crude detector cobbled together from ship components. The storm's changing composition. That's not just wind. I scanned the entrance with my armor's sensors and realized he was right. The usual toxic compounds had been joined by something new, a fine crystalline substance that glittered as it settled on the debris. Silicate microshards I identified. They'll shred unprotected tissue on contact. And your armor's joints are not fully sealed, Dane observed. Those particles will work their way into your system within minutes. I was startled by his observation. Few non-Zari could identify the vulnerability in our exo-armor design. How did you? I've had a lot of time to study the predators here, he replied, already moving to a storage container near his workstation. Some of them have similar armor configurations. Same weaknesses. He returned with what appeared to be a thick, viscous gel in a makeshift applicator. This should help. It's a sealant I developed from local resin plants. Forms a temporary molecular bond with most metals and ceramics. I hesitated only briefly before accepting his offer. As he applied the gel to my armor's vulnerable joints, I noticed the numerous scars on his hands, evidence of countless trials and errors in his fight for survival. Your AI, I began searching for neutral conversation. She seems unusual for a standard assistance program. Juno was experimental tech, Dane explained, designed to learn and adapt far beyond normal parameters. The Deep Space Corps wanted AIs that could help crews survive if stranded in hostile environments. I'd say that experiment was successful, I observed. The success rate is currently 1 out of 7, Juno interjected dryly. I wouldn't call those promising statistics. We're working on improving those numbers, Dane added, finishing with the sealant application. There, that should hold until the storm passes. As he stepped back, our proximity sensors triggered simultaneously, alerting us to movement deeper in the cave system. Without a word, we both dropped into defensive positions, weapons ready. Juno analysis, Dane whispered. Multiple signatures, the AI responded. Larger than the silicate scavengers, smaller than the earthshakers. Moving in formation, hunting pattern. Shadow maw, I identified grimly. They shouldn't be this deep underground. The storm must have driven them in, Dane said, checking his makeshift weapon, a surprisingly elegant fusion of salvaged ship technology and local materials. They'll be hungry and disoriented. I assessed our situation quickly. Fighting in these confined spaces is suicide. We need to... There's another way out, Dane interrupted. A passage I've been mapping that leads to a secondary chamber. If we move now, we can reach it before they cut us off. Any other time, I would have bristled at being interrupted. Instead, I found myself nodding. Lead the way. We moved swiftly through the ancient corridors, Dane navigating with the confidence of someone who had spent months memorizing every turn. The sounds of the pursuing predators grew closer, the distinctive clicking of their sensory appendages echoing off the stone walls. "Here," Dane whispered, indicating a narrow fissure in the wall that I would have missed entirely. "It's tight, but it opens up on the other side." I hesitated. "My armor will just barely fit. I've measured similar dimensions when planning escape routes." The realization that he'd factored Zari armor specifications into his survival planning was both impressive and unsettling. How long had he been watching my kind from the shadows? With no time to question further, I squeezed through the opening, the edges of my armor scraping against stone. Dane followed, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to make himself smaller, more adaptable in this hostile environment. We emerged into another chamber, this one smaller but equally intricate in its construction. At its center stood what appeared to be an altar or control console, its surface etched with the same symbols that covered the walls. "What is this place?" I asked, momentarily distracted from our pursuers. "I call it the Nexus," Dane replied, moving to the central structure. "It's connected to similar chambers across the planet. I think it was some kind of monitoring station, a place where the ancients could observe and perhaps control Meyhara's environmental systems." He placed his hand on a specific section of the console, and to my astonishment, it responded, illuminating with a soft blue glow that spread to the surrounding walls. "How did you activate it?" I demanded. "Trial and error. Lots of error," he admitted. "But I've learned that certain interactions, specific pressure patterns, body temperature, even bioelectrical signals can trigger different functions." The pursuing shadow maws reached the fissure we'd escaped through, their claws scrabbling against the stone as they tried to force their larger bodies through the narrow opening. "They'll find another way around," I warned. "Shadow maws are persistent. They're also sensitive to certain frequencies," Dane said, manipulating something on the console. The blue glow intensified and a low hum filled the chamber just at the edge of my hearing range. The effect on our pursuers was immediate. The scrabbling stopped, replaced by high-pitched keening sounds that gradually faded as the creatures retreated. "Sound weaponry," I observed, impressed despite myself. "You've weaponized the ancient technology." "I prefer to think of it as communication," Dane corrected. "The frequency doesn't hurt them. It mimics the territorial markers of larger predators, tells them this area is claimed by something they don't want to challenge." As the immediate danger passed, I found myself studying Dane with renewed interest. This human didn't just survive, he understood. He'd immersed himself in Meyhara's ecology, learned its languages, deciphered its ancient secrets. In barely 2 years, he'd accomplished what Zari researchers hadn't managed in centuries. "Why are you really here, Kael'Zari?" he asked suddenly, his focus shifting from the console to me. "Elite hunters don't patrol random sectors of Meyhara without purpose." I considered lying. It would have been the prudent course. But something about this human made me reconsider. "I'm tracking intruders," I admitted. "A salvage vessel entered Meyhara's atmosphere 3 cycles ago, landing in the Burning Plains region. They're not authorized to be here." "Pirates?" Dane asked, echoing my earlier question. "Something worse," I replied, deliberately mirroring his phrasing. "Artifact hunters. They seek technology from ancient civilizations, technology like this." I gestured to the chamber around us. Dane's expression hardened. "They're after the core crystal." The term sent a shock through me. "How do you know about that?" "The same way I know about everything else on this planet. I've studied it. The symbols here tell a story about a central node, a crystal matrix that once regulated Meyhara's entire ecosystem. The ancients used it to transform this world from a toxic wasteland into a garden. And you believe it still exists?" "I know it does," he said with quiet certainty. "I've seen it." Before I could press him further, Juno interrupted. "Dane, atmospheric readings are stabilizing. The storm's passing." He nodded, seemingly relieved. "We should move. If these artifact hunters are heading for the core, we need to reach it first." I questioned, raising an eyebrow ridge. "Unless you plan to shoot me now that I'm useful," he replied with that same wry smile. In which case I should warn you, I've survived worse than Zari plasma rounds. For the first time in centuries, I found myself laughing sounds so unfamiliar it startled us both. I'm not going to shoot you, Dane Riker, at least not until I see this core crystal for myself. His smile widened slightly. High praise from a Zari elite. As we prepared to leave the sanctuary of the ancient chamber, I found myself confronting an uncomfortable truth. This human, this supposedly fragile inferior species, had not only survived Meyhara, but had unlocked secrets that had eluded my kind for generations. And I, Kael'Zari Elite Hunter of the Zari Dominion, was beginning to question everything I thought I knew about strength. The path to the core crystal wasn't straightforward. As we emerged from the ancient chamber, Meyhara's landscape had been transformed by the storm, familiar landmarks buried beneath crystalline deposits. New chasms torn into the earth, previously dormant predators, now actively hunting in the altered terrain. The route I normally take won't work, Dane observed, studying the horizon through a makeshift optical enhancer. The silicate fields have shifted, and there's a new thermal vent system that's opened up along the eastern approach. I consulted my armor's mapping system only to find it struggling to reconcile the new topography with its existing data. My navigation is compromised as well. The storm has altered the magnetic field readings. Dane didn't seem concerned. Meyhara changes every day. You adapt or you die. He pointed to a distant rock formation that resembled a jagged spine protruding from the planet's surface. We'll use the razor's edge as our guide. The core lies beneath the valley beyond it. That's at least 20 kilometers through prime hunting territory, I noted. 23.4 actually, Juno corrected. And based on current atmospheric conditions, we have approximately 9 hours before the next toxic front rolls in from the western wastes. Dane gathered his essential gear with practiced efficiency water synthesizers, atmospheric filters, the weapon he had modified from ship parts, and several containers of what appeared to be locally sourced medicinals. You travel light, I observed. Everything on Meyhara wants to kill you, he replied simply. Speed is survival. As we set out across the transformed landscape, I found myself studying his movements. Despite the planet's punishing gravity nearly twice Earth's standard, he moved with a fluid economy that spoke of hard-won adaptation. His breathing remained steady even as we navigated steep inclines, his steps sure on terrain that would send most visitors tumbling to their deaths. How did you adapt to the gravity? I asked during a brief pause as we surveyed the path ahead. Painfully, he admitted with a short laugh. The first month I could barely stand, broke 3 ribs just trying to climb out of the crash site. He flexed his left hand, which I noticed had several fingers that had been broken and reset without proper medical attention. Your body adapts when it has no choice. Human bones and muscles rebuild stronger under stress if the stress doesn't kill you first. Most humans would have died from the gravity alone, I pointed out. Most humans don't have my stubborn streak, he countered. Then after a moment's hesitation, and most don't have Juno, she developed a biochemical regimen using local flora that helped accelerate my adaptation. Without her, I'd have been dead within weeks. He gives me too much credit, Juno interjected. I merely provided the chemical formulas. He's the one who dragged himself through toxic wastelands with compound fractures to gather the necessary specimens. Something in her tone caught my attention, a warmth that went beyond standard AI-human interaction protocols. Their relationship was symbiotic, forged in survival, tempered by shared trauma. We continued our journey in comfortable silence, communicating only when necessary to point out hazards or adjust our route. As we approached a particularly treacherous section, a field of crystalline formations that vibrated at frequencies capable of disrupting both biological and technological systems, Dane stopped and turned to excuse me, we need to cross the singing fields, he said, gesturing to the glittering expanse before us. The crystals interfere with most technology, including your armor's forward systems. We'll need to shut down all non-essential functions. I hesitated. Deactivating my armor systems meant vulnerability, something Zari elites are trained from birth to avoid at all costs. There's no alternate route, I asked already, knowing the answer. He shook his head. Not with our time constraints. The fields are dangerous, but I've crossed them before. There's a safe path if you know how to listen. Listen. The crystals sing, he explained. Different harmonics indicate different densities and vibration patterns. The safest path sounds discordant, harsh. It's counterintuitive, but the ugliest sounds mark the most stable areas. I considered our options. Going around would take too long. Turning back wasn't an option. And despite all logical reasons to distrust this human, I found myself believing him. Very well, I conceded, initiating my armor's shutdown sequence. Basic life support only. As my systems powered down, I felt suddenly exposed. Without my enhanced sensory feeds, tactical overlays, and weapon targeting systems, I was experiencing Meyhara almost as Dane did, raw, immediate, overwhelming. The silence was deafening at first, then gradually filled with sounds. I'd been filtering out the subtle whistle of toxic winds through crystalline formations, the distant calls of native fauna, and yes, the singing of the crystal field before us. "Follow exactly in my footsteps," Dane instructed, his voice pitched low. "Step where I step, pause when I pause. The field shifts constantly. What was safe yesterday might be lethal today." He moved forward with practiced caution, head slightly tilted as if listening to conversations I couldn't quite hear. I followed, matching his pace, precisely feeling the vibrations through my boots as we navigated the crystalline maze. The singing became more apparent as we ventured deeper, haunting tones that shifted in layers, sometimes beautiful, sometimes jarring. Dane consistently moved toward the harshest dissonance, occasionally stopping completely when the harmony shifted unexpectedly. Halfway across, disaster struck. A distant tremor, likely from one of Meyhara's frequent tectonic adjustments, changed the field's resonance. Crystals that had been stable moments before began to vibrate violently. "Run!" Dane shouted, abandoning caution for speed. We sprinted through the destabilizing field crystals shattering around us. A particularly large formation directly in our path began to fracture, its harmonics rising to a painful shriek. Without hesitation, Dane tackled me sideways, sending us both tumbling into a depression as the crystal exploded. Shards tore through the air where we'd been standing, their edges sharp enough to penetrate even Zari armor. We landed hard, Dane taking the brunt of the impact. As the crystalline storm subsided, I realized he wasn't moving. "Dane," I rolled him over carefully, noting a large shard embedded in his shoulder. A wound that would have been minor for me, but potentially fatal for a human. "I'm fine," he grunted, though his pallor suggested otherwise. "Just need a minute." "He is not fine," Juno contradicted sharply. "The crystal contains neurotoxic compounds. He needs the antidote from his med kit immediately." I located the kit among his gear and followed Juno's precise instructions, administering a viscous green substance to the wound after removing the shard. Dane's breathing stabilized, though his skin remained unnaturally pale. "That was unnecessarily heroic," I told him as he regained full consciousness. "I could have survived that impact." "Maybe," he acknowledged with a grimace. "Wasn't really thinking in terms of cost-benefit analysis at the time." "He means he reacted instinctively to protect another person," Juno translated. "It's a human failing that has unfortunately proved resistant to my attempts at reprogramming." I studied him with newfound confusion. "You risked your life for me, a Zari. We're not exactly known for our benevolence toward other species." Dane managed to sit up, testing his injured shoulder with a wince. "I didn't save a Zari. I saved a person I've been traveling with. Species didn't enter into it." The simplicity of his statement struck me deeply. In all my centuries, I'd categorized, classified, and judged other beings based on their taxonomic categories. Humans were soft bodies. Meroxians were hive minds. Tellurian drifters were silicon-based anomalies. Each neatly compartmentalized, their worth predetermined by their biological classification. Dane saw people. "Can you walk?" I asked, offering my hand without conscious thought. He nodded, accepting my help with a grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd just been poisoned. "We need to keep moving. That explosion will attract scavengers." Sure enough, as we cleared the crystal field, my reactivated sensors detected movement converging on our position from multiple directions. Silicate feeders, I identified, at least 24. "They're drawn to the crystal harmonics," Dane explained, gathering his strength as we increased our pace. The explosion was like a dinner bell. We pushed forward, navigating the treacherous terrain with renewed urgency. Despite his injury, Dane maintained a pace that would have impressed me even from a healthy Zari warrior. His determination was inspiring. As we approached the Razor's Edge formation, The sun began to set, casting Meyhara's toxic landscape in bloody crimson light. The temperature plummeted rapidly, another of the planet's deadly defense mechanisms. "We need shelter for the night cycle," I said, noting frost already forming on nearby rock formations. "The temperature will drop below survivable levels within hours." Dane pointed to a dark opening at the base of the razor's edge. "There's a thermal vent system inside that formation, dangerous but warmer than staying exposed." The cave system was cramped and winding, forcing me to duck my armored form beneath low-hanging stalactites. Dane navigated the narrow passages with practiced ease, despite his injury leading us deeper until we reached a small chamber heated by a glowing vent of superheated gases. "Don't get too close," he warned. "The vents shift unpredictably, but the ambient heat should keep us from freezing." As we settled in for the night cycle, I observed him tending to his wound with methodical efficiency, cleaning it, applying more of the green medicinal paste, then binding it with strips of material that looked suspiciously like modified sections of a standard-issue Space Corps uniform. "You should rest," I suggested. "I'll take first watch." He looked surprised at the offer but didn't argue. "Wake me in 4 hours." The vents sometimes release toxic gases during the deepest part of the night cycle. Within minutes, he was asleep, another survival adaptation I realized. The ability to rest when opportunity presented itself, regardless of circumstances. "He trusts you," Juno observed quietly from her position on Dane's wrist. "That's rare." "Should he, Dane?" I asked, genuinely curious at most. "I don't know," the AI replied. "Should he trust a member of a species that considers his kind barely sentient? You tell me, Elite Hunter." Her directness was refreshing. "I haven't decided yet," I admitted, "but he saved my life today. That complicates things." "Funny how basic decency does that," Juno noted dryly. We fell into silence, the only sounds the soft hiss of the thermal vent and Dane's steady breathing. In that quiet moment, I found myself confronting uncomfortable questions. Why had I never questioned my people's assessment of humans? Why had I accepted their classification as weak, inferior beings? The evidence lying before me, scarred, resilient, undeniably remarkable, contradicted everything I'd been taught. More disturbingly, I found myself caring whether this particular human lived or died, not as a specimen or a curiosity, but as Dane, an individual with courage, intelligence, and surprising depth. As if sensing my thoughts, Juno spoke again. "He talked about you, long before you found us." "Me?" I asked, startled. "The Zari. He studied your people through the limited data we salvaged from the ship. Said if any species could survive Meyhara long-term, it would be yours." There was a pause. "He admired you before he ever met you." The revelation left me speechless. While my kind had dismissed his as insignificant, he had been learning about us, respecting our capabilities. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Because tomorrow will be dangerous," Juno replied simply. "And I need to know if you'll leave him behind when things get difficult." "Because he won't leave you." The directness of her concern was startling. I found myself wanting to reassure this artificial intelligence, to promise I wouldn't abandon her human. But Zari don't make promises lightly. "I'll do what the situation requires," I said instead. "That's what I was afraid of," Juno responded, her voice fading as she entered a power conservation mode. Left alone with my thoughts, I watched Dane sleep. The firelight from the thermal vent cast his scarred face in a warm glow, softening the hard edges that survival had carved into him. In repose, he looked almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the determined survivor I'd been traveling with. What would happen when we reached the core crystal? I'd been sent to stop the artifact hunters, yes, but also to secure any valuable technology for the Dominion. Dane clearly had his own agenda. Would we find ourselves at cross purposes? Would I be forced to choose between my duty and this respect I was developing for him? These questions troubled me, through my watch echoing in my mind like the distant singing of Meyhara's crystal fields. I woke Dane exactly 4 hours later as promised. He came to consciousness instantly, transitioning from sleep to full alertness without the groggy disorientation most species experience. "Vent status," he asked immediately, already checking his environmental sensors. "Stable," I reported. "No toxic emissions during your rest period." He nodded, seeming surprised. "That's unusual. Meyhara doesn't often grant reprieves." Perhaps it's making an exception, I suggested with unexpected lightness. His lips curved slightly, more likely gathering strength for whatever it plans to throw at us next. He stretched carefully, testing his injured shoulder. How far to the core crystals from here? My scans indicate a massive energy signature approximately 5 kilometers beneath our current position, I replied. But the direct route appears to be blocked by recent seismic activity. There's another way, Dane said, gathering his gear. The ancients built a network of maintenance tunnels throughout this region. One of the access points should be near the base of this formation. As we prepared to continue our journey, I noticed Dane swaying slightly as he stood, a momentary weakness he quickly masked. The neurotoxin is still affecting you, I observed. I'm fine, he insisted. He is operating at approximately 68% of normal capacity, Juno contradicted. The antidote neutralized the worst effects, but complete metabolization requires additional time. Time we don't have, Dane pointed out. Those artifact hunters won't wait for me to feel better before they reach the core. I made a decision then, one that would have been unthinkable days earlier. I'll carry additional equipment. You focus on navigation and conserving strength. He looked as if he might argue, then nodded. Thank you. We emerged from our shelter into Meyhara's morning landscape, transformed once again by the planet's nightly cycle. Frost covered every surface, beautiful and lethal, cracking beneath our feet as we moved toward the location Dane had identified. There, he said, pointing to what appeared to be a natural fissure in the rock face. The entrance is disguised, but the pattern of erosion is too uniform to be natural. He was right. As we approached, I could see subtle geometric patterns in what had appeared random at first glance. Dane ran his hands along the rock face until he found what he was searching for a depression that responded to his touch, sliding aside to reveal a narrow passage. How did you know where to press? I asked, impressed yet again by his knowledge. The ancients liked symmetry, he explained. Their access points always mirror the surrounding geological features. Once you know the pattern, you can find them anywhere on the planet. The passage beyond was clearly artificial, a perfectly cylindrical tunnel that descended at a gentle slope, its walls lined with the same bioluminescent material we'd seen in the previous chambers. Unlike those spaces, however, this tunnel showed signs of damaged sections had collapsed, forcing us to climb over debris and squeeze through narrowed passages. Recent damage, Dane noted, examining a freshly broken section. Someone's been through here within the last few days. The artifact hunters, I concluded. They've found the network. We increased our pace, descending deeper into Meyhara's crust. The tunnel system became more complex, branching, rejoining, sometimes opening into larger chambers filled with machinery so alien I couldn't begin to guess its purpose. The ancients were terraformers, Dane explained as we passed through one such chamber. These systems once regulated Meyhara's atmosphere, hydrosphere, even its tectonic activity. What happened to them? I asked. War, he replied grimly. The symbols tell a story of conflict, an external threat that forced them to weaponize their paradise. They turned Meyhara from a garden into a fortress, transforming life-giving systems into defensive measures. The toxic atmosphere, the predatory fauna, all engineered, he confirmed, designed to protect something valuable at the planet's core. The crystal, he nodded. The crystal wasn't just a control system, it was something more. Something their enemies wanted badly enough to destroy an entire civilization to obtain. As we descended further, the signs of the artifact hunter's passage became more evident. Discarded equipment, blast marks where they'd forced their way through collapsed sections, even bodies of local predators they'd killed and left to rot. Careless, I observed, leaving evidence of their passage. Or confident, Dane countered. These aren't scavengers hoping for a lucky find. They're well-equipped, well-informed. They knew exactly where they were going. My unease grew. Typical artifact hunters were opportunists following rumors, working on speculation. These seemed more like a military operation with specific intelligence. We emerged into a vast underground cavern that took my breath away. The ceiling soared hundreds of meters above us, supported by massive columns that appeared to be made of the same crystalline material we'd encountered on the surface, but perfectly formed and undamaged. The floor was an intricate mosaic depicting star patterns I recognized from ancient star charts, a map of this galactic sector as it had appeared millions of years ago. The approach, Dane said reverently. I've only seen it in fragments of the ancients' records. It's more beautiful than I imagined. Even my jaded warrior's perspective couldn't deny the majesty of the space. This wasn't merely functional architecture, it was art on a monumental scale designed to inspire awe. There, I said, indicating fresh marks on the polished floor. Multiple humanoids heavily equipped. They passed through recently. Dane nodded grimly, and they're getting careless, leaving more evidence moving faster. He pointed to the far side of the chamber where a massive doorway stood partially open. They've already breached the inner sanctum. We moved quickly across the chamber, alert for traps or defenses. The doorway led to another tunnel, this one spiraling downward in a perfect helical pattern. Unlike the previous passages, this one was pristine, untouched by time or damage, its surfaces gleaming as if newly created. We're close, Dane murmured. The core chamber lies at the end of this passage. As if to confirm his words, a deep vibration passed through the structure, not the random tremors of Meyhara's tectonic activity, but a rhythmic pulse that I felt in my chest cavity. They've activated something, I warned. Not activated, Dane corrected, his expression darkening. Destabilized. The crystal is responding to interference. We abandoned caution for speed, racing down the spiral passage as the vibrations intensified. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with energy that made my armor's warning systems flash an alarm. The passage ended abruptly, opening onto a scene that stopped us in our tracks. Before us stretched an enormous spherical chamber. Its walls composed entirely of the same crystalline material we'd seen throughout our journey, but pulsing with internal light that shifted through colors I had no names for. At the chamber's center, suspended in what appeared to be a field of pure energy, hovered a crystal the size of a small shuttle, its facets containing what looked like galaxies in miniature, swirling with stars and celestial bodies. And surrounding it, a group of heavily armed figures worked at control interfaces, their actions clearly causing the distress signals that had drawn us here. That's not a control system, I whispered, awed despite myself. That's something else entirely. It's a seed, Dane said softly, a world seed, capable of transforming an entire planet according to its programming. The ancients didn't just terraform Meyhara. They grew it, nurtured it, shaped it from primordial matter into a living ecosystem. And those people are trying to remove it, I realized with growing horror. If they disconnect it from Meyhara's systems, the planet dies, he finished grimly. Not just the current hostile ecosystem, but everything. Meyhara would collapse into its component elements. We concealed ourselves behind a crystalline formation, observing the intruders. There were 8 of them wearing advanced environmental suits with insignias I didn't recognize. Not pirates or common scavengers, but something more organized, more dangerous. Can you identify them? I asked Dane, who was studying them intently. Genesis Consortium, he replied, his voice hardening. Private organization specializing in reclamation of extinct technologies. They operate beyond the fringe, answering to no authority but their own board of directors. The same group that ambushed your ship, I guessed. He nodded once, jaw tight. Same tactics, same equipment. I understood then why this mission had become personal for him. These weren't random artifact hunters. They were the same organization that had killed his crew, taken his friends. What's our play? I asked, deferring to his knowledge of both the facility and our opponents. He studied the situation, his eyes calculating. They've bypassed the primary security systems, but they haven't disabled the crystal's internal defenses. If we can trigger those, we'd be caught in the response as well, I pointed out. Not if we synchronize with the defense grid first. He indicated a smaller control interface near our position. That terminal should allow us to register as authorized users if I can decipher the command sequences. How tonnerre? With Juno's help, maybe 10 minutes. He glanced at the artifact hunters who were making steady progress, which might be too long. I made my decision. I'll create a diversion, give you the time you need. That's suicide, he objected. There are 8 of them, heavily armed. I'm Zari, I reminded him with a predatory smile. We excel at impossible odds. Before he could argue further, I activated my armor's combat protocols, feeling the familiar surge as systems redirected power to offensive capabilities. I hadn't come expecting a fight of this magnitude, but I was never unprepared. 10 minutes, I told him. Make them count. I launched myself from cover targeting systems identifying the greatest threats in microseconds. My first shots took down 2 of the intruders before they even registered my presence. The others reacted with trained precision, scattering to defensive positions and returning fire. Their weapons were impressive military-grade plasma disruptors that left scorch marks on my armor where they grazed it. I moved constantly using the crystalline formations for cover striking when openings presented themselves. 2 more fell to my precision fire, but the remaining 4 adapted quickly, coordinating their attacks to limit my mobility. A shot caught me squarely in the chest plate, the impact sending me stumbling backward. Warning indicators flashed across my display. The hit had compromised my armor's integrity. Another direct hit would likely penetrate. I glanced toward Dane's position. He was working feverishly at the control interface, Juno's holographic form projecting from his wrist device as they collaborated on deciphering the ancient system. One of the intruders spotted him, their secondary team at the auxiliary controls. 2 of them broke off to intercept Dane, leaving 2 focused on me. It was the opening I needed. I charged the nearest attacker, closing to melee range, where my Zari combat training gave me an overwhelming advantage. My armor's enhanced strength let me tear through his defenses, neutralizing him with brutal efficiency. The second opponent was more skilled, landing a series of hits that further damaged my systems. My counterattack was hampered by failing servos in my left arm, but I compensated with increased aggression, a strategy that proved effective as my opponent faltered under the onslaught. Meanwhile, Dane had abandoned the control interface to deal with his attackers. To my shock, he was holding his own, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of formal combat training enhanced by his time surviving on Meyhara. His makeshift weapon fired concentrated bursts of energy that didn't have the raw power of military hardware, but were precisely targeted at vulnerabilities in their environmental suits. One of his attackers fell, environmental systems failing catastrophically as Meyhara's toxic atmosphere flooded his compromised suit. The second pressed Dane hard, forcing him away from the control interface with a barrage of fire. I dispatched my remaining opponent and moved to assist Dane, but a sudden surge of energy from the crystal halted everyone in their tracks. The massive artifact was pulsing rapidly now, its light darkening toward a deep crimson that filled the chamber with a bloody glow. "It's going critical," shouted one of the remaining artifact hunters. "Extract protocol now." The leader activated a device on his wrist, and a shimmering field began to form around the crystal, a containment system designed to separate it from its moorings. "No," Dane shouted, abandoning his fight to lunge for the main control interface. "You'll kill the entire planet." The hunter he had been fighting took advantage of his shift in focus, firing a shot that caught Dane squarely in the back. He stumbled, fell, but continued crawling toward the interface with single-minded determination. I intercepted the hunter before he could fire again, engaging him with fury I hadn't felt in centuries. This wasn't clinical Zari combat technique. This was rage, primal and consuming. He fell quickly beneath my onslaught, but the damage was done. Dane had reached the interface but was clearly struggling, blood spreading across his back where the blast had torn through his makeshift armor. "Juno," he gasped. "Execute stabilization protocol." "Dane, your vitals are—" "Do it," he commanded with unexpected strength. The AI complied, her holographic form interfacing directly with the ancient controls. The crystal's pulsing slowed, its color shifting from angry red back toward a calmer blue. The remaining artifact hunter, clearly the team leader, snarled in frustration. 2 years planning this extraction, and I'm not leaving empty-handed. He redirected his extraction device, reducing its field to encompass only a fragment of the crystal. "A sample will have to suffice." I moved to stop him, but Dane's voice halted me. "Kael, let him." "What?" I turned to him in shock. "The fragment isn't critical. Planet will survive." He coughed, red staining his lips. "Not worth your life." The hunter activated his extraction device. A small shard no larger than my hand, separated from the crystal's surface, immediately contained within the shimmering field. With a final look of triumph, he activated what was clearly an emergency teleport system, disappearing in a flash of energy. I rushed to Dane's side armor scans, confirming what I already knew. His injury was severe, possibly fatal, without immediate medical intervention. Why did you let him take it? I demanded, applying pressure to his wound. He smiled weakly. Because some battles aren't worth the pattern. The core remains. Meyhara will live. So will you. I insisted, administering the strongest medications from my armor's limited medical supplies. I didn't track you across this hellscape just to watch you die. Touching sentiment from Zari, he managed, though his voice was fading. Okay, Juno interrupted urgently. The crystal is responding to Dane's condition. Look! I turned to see tendrils of energy extending from the massive crystal, reaching toward us like curious fingers. Where they touched the chamber floor, vegetation appeared, not the toxic variants that covered Meyhara's surface, but something else entirely. Lush, vibrant plant life that seemed to breathe pure oxygen into the chamber. It remembers, Dane whispered, watching the phenomenon with wonder despite his pain, what it was meant to be before the wars. The energy tendrils reached us, surrounding Dane in a cocoon of shifting light. I started to pull him away, fearing some defensive measure, but Juno stopped me. Wait, she urged. His vitals are stabilizing. Incredulous, I watched as the energy from the crystal interacted with Dane's wounded body. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. His breathing eased. Color returned to his face. It's healing him, I realized with awe. Not healing, Juno corrected, analyzing the data streaming from her sensors. Adapting him, integrating. The crystal is communicating with his cellular structure. When the energy finally receded, Dane sat up, slowly examining himself with wonder. The wound remained, but was now covered with a crystalline lattice that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. What happened? He asked, his voice stronger than it had any right to be. The crystal responded to you. I explained, still trying to process what I'd witnessed. It chose you. Dane looked toward the massive artifact, which had stabilized into a serene blue-white glow. Not me specifically, he said thoughtfully. It responded to intent. I wanted to protect it, to preserve Meyhara. It recognized that. He stood carefully, testing his renewed strength. The crystalline lattice covering his wound glistened, tiny points of light moving through it like stars in a miniature galaxy. I think I understand now, he continued, approaching the crystal with reverence. The ancients didn't abandon Meyhara. They transformed themselves, became part of the system they created. He touched the crystal's surface gently. They're still here, watching, waiting for someone who sees this world as something more than a resource to be exploited. The crystal pulsed beneath his touch, responding to him in ways I couldn't comprehend. The chamber filled with projections, images of Meyhara as it once was, a verdant paradise, teeming with life and glimpses of what it could be again. It wants to heal, Dane said softly, to return to its original purpose, but it needs guidance, protection. I joined him beside the crystal, feeling its energy ripple against my armor. What will you do? He turned to me, his expression resolute. Stay, learn, help it rebuild. His gaze held mine. Unless you are planning to claim this technology for the Dominion. It was a fair question. I had been sent to secure valuable artifacts to prevent them from falling into rival hands. The core crystal represented technology beyond anything. The Zari possessed a prize beyond measure. Yet as I stood there, watching this human who had defied every expectation, who had survived where none should, who had formed a connection with an ancient intelligence that recognized his worth, I found my priorities shifting. The crystal stays where it is, I declared. My report will indicate that the ancient technology was unstable, too dangerous to transport, best left undisturbed. Relief in something warmer flashed across Dane's features. They'll send others eventually. Likely, yo, I agreed, which is why I'm staying as well. His surprise was evident. You're abandoning your mission. Modifying it, I corrected. The Dominion ordered me to neutralize threats to valuable technology. I've determined that removal would constitute the greatest threat to this artifact's integrity. A slow smile spread across his face. That's quite the creative interpretation of your orders. I've learned flexibility recently, I replied, surprising myself with the humor in my tone. From a rather stubborn human. Juno's holographic form shimmered with what might have been amusement. Well, this should be interesting. A Zari elite and a human castaway protecting an ancient world seed from the galaxy's greediest opportunists. We'll need to establish defenses, I said, already thinking tactically. Early warning systems, countermeasures. and begin the healing process. Dane added, looking at the spreading vegetation with wonder. The crystal wants to restore Meyhara, return it to what it was meant to be. We can help guide that process. As we discussed plans, the chamber continued to transform around us. Patches of vibrant plant life, expanding the air, growing cleaner, the harsh angles of the crystalline walls softening with organic growth. In that moment, watching Dane interact with the ancient system with such natural affinity, I finally understood what had drawn me to him, what had challenged everything I thought I knew about strength. It wasn't just his physical resilience or his intelligence, it was his capacity for wonder, for compassion, for seeing beauty in a world designed to kill him. It was his fundamental humanity qualities my people had dismissed as weaknesses, but where I now realized tremendous strengths. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing my contemplative silence. "That I was wrong," I admitted. "About humans, about you, about what constitutes true strength." He smiled, not the wry, guarded expression I'd grown accustomed to, but something more genuine. "For what it's worth, I think the Zari got a lot of things right. Your resilience, your discipline, your adaptability. We're not so different at our core." As if responding to his words, the crystal pulsed brightly, projecting new images around us, futures, possibilities, paths forward. Among them, I glimpsed a transformed Meyhara, its deadly defenses repurposed into a balanced ecosystem where multiple species could thrive. "Looks like we have work to do," Dane observed, studying the projections with the keen eye of a scientist and the wonder of an explorer. I nodded, feeling something I hadn't experienced in centuries: anticipation, purpose beyond mere survival or conquest. "Indeed we do." And so began a new chapter, not just for Meyhara or for Dane and myself, but perhaps for the understanding between our species. A death world would become a cradle for cooperation. The very hostility that had forged both Zari and human resilience, transforming into something new, something better. As Dane reached out to touch another control interface, the crystal responded with cascades of light that played across his features. In that moment, I saw not a fragile human or an inferior species, but a partner worthy of respect, someone who had not just survived Meyhara, but had understood it, connected with it, loved it, even as it tried to kill him. And in doing so, he had changed my understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. 3 months after our confrontation with the Genesis Consortium, Meyhara was changing. The transformation began around the core crystal, spreading outward in concentric circles of restoration. What had once been toxic wastelands slowly shifted, not overnight, but through careful, deliberate processes. Dane and I established our primary base in the ancient chambers surrounding the crystal, gradually expanding outward as we monitored the planet's metamorphosis. Our unlikely partnership had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated, a collaboration that drew on both Zari tactical discipline and human adaptability. The northern quadrant is showing increased atmospheric stabilization. Dane noted one morning as we reviewed the latest data. The crystalline lattice on his back had become a permanent fixture, pulsing softly with the same rhythm as the core. Toxicity levels down nearly 40%. The predator populations are adapting as well. I added, displaying holographic representations of the changing ecosystem. The shadow maws have begun modifying their hunting patterns, less aggression, more selective predation. Dane smiled at that, nature finding balance again. We'd developed a routine of sorts. Each day we'd monitor the crystal's progress, perform maintenance on our expanding network of sensors, and venture to the surface to document changes and collect specimens. Sometimes we'd work in companionable silence. Other times we'd share stories of our respective worlds and cultures. I learned that Dane had been considered unusual among his own kind, too restless, too curious, too willing to challenge established paradigms. He'd joined the Deep Space Corps not out of patriotism or ambition, but from a genuine desire to understand the universe and its myriad life forms. In turn, I shared aspects of Zari culture that few outsiders ever glimpsed: our art, our philosophy, our complex family structures. I found myself viewing my own civilization through new eyes, recognizing both its strengths and its blind spots. "Your people are remarkable in many ways," Dane observed one evening as we watched twin moons rise through a viewing portal. "But your classification systems limited you. You categorized species as superior or inferior before truly understanding them. And humans don't," I challenged, though without rancor. "Oh, we absolutely do," he admitted with a laugh. "Probably worse in many ways. The difference is that our shorter lifespans force us to adapt more quickly. When you live for centuries, perspective becomes harder to shift." He had a point. My 300 years had given me confidence that sometimes verged on arrogance, a certainty that my understanding was comprehensive, my assessments accurate. Meeting Dane had shattered that certainty, and I was better for it. Our 6th month brought the first visitors, a Zari scout ship responding to my long silence. I had expected this eventually. The Dominion doesn't simply forget about its elite hunters. Dane and I watched from a hidden observation post as the ship landed near the Razor's Edge formation. "What's our play?" he asked, using my own phrase from months earlier. I considered our options. "I still hold my rank and authority. They'll listen if I order them to withdraw. And if they don't, then we demonstrate why that would be unwise," I replied, patting the enhanced weapon system we developed using a fusion of Zari technology and the Ancients' designs. The scout team consisted of 4 warriors, young, inexperienced by my standards, but still dangerous. They moved with typical Zari precision, scanning for threats, establishing a defensive perimeter around their vessel. "Stay here," I told Dane. "Let me handle this first approach." He nodded, though I could tell he was preparing contingencies in case things went poorly. Another trait I'd come to respect: his ability to trust without surrendering caution. I approached the scout team openly, my armor gleaming in Meyhara's harsh sunlight. Their reactions shifted from alert to recognition as they identified my elite hunter insignia. "Commander Kael'Zari," the team leader acknowledged with appropriate deference. "The Dominion feared you lost." "Clearly an exaggeration," I replied dryly. "State your purpose." "Retrieval Commander, you ceased regular reports 196 cycles ago. We were dispatched to assess your status and recover any valuable intelligence." I nodded, having expected as much. My mission parameters evolved based on findings of exceptional significance. I remained to secure and study critical technology. The young warriors exchanged glances, clearly noting my unorthodox phrasing. Elite hunters didn't typically study anything we assessed acquired and returned to the Dominion with our prizes. "We are authorized to provide extraction for you in any acquired artifacts," the leader continued. "Extraction is neither necessary nor advisable," I replied firmly. "The technology in question cannot be removed without catastrophic consequences. I have established a research outpost to monitor and protect these discoveries." More confused glances. "Commander, with respect, research assignments fall outside standard hunter protocols. The High Command expects me to exercise judgment based on field conditions." I interrupted. "I have done so. You will return to the Dominion with my full report and recommendations." I transmitted a carefully edited version of my findings, enough to establish the importance of Meyhara and its crystal, but omitting certain details about Dane, about the healing process already underway, about my own evolving perspective. The team leader received the data packet with obvious uncertainty. "These findings are unprecedented, Commander. The High Command may wish to send a full scientific contingent." "They are welcome to do so," I agreed, "under strict protocols that I will establish. This site remains under my authority until formally reassigned." After further discussion and a subtle demonstration of the defensive capabilities we'd installed around the landing area, the scout team departed with my report. As their ship vanished into Meyhara's turbulent upper atmosphere, Dane emerged from his hiding place. "That went better than expected," he observed. "They're young," I replied, respectful of rank. "The real challenge will come when the Dominion processes my report." "Will they honor your recommendations?" I considered this. "Probably not entirely, but they'll proceed with caution. I've given them enough information to pique their interest without revealing the crystal's full potential." "Buying us time," Dane nodded approvingly. "Time we'll need," I agreed. Meyhara isn't ready for visitors, yet not even my own kind. We returned to our base, discussing additional measures we'd need to implement before the inevitable arrival of more Zari. As we descended into the ancient chambers, the crystal pulsed in greeting, a phenomenon that had become familiar over the months. What happened next, however, was new. The crystal projected not its usual patterns of data or planetary assessments, but a clearly deliberate message symbols that matched those on the chamber walls, but arranged in sequences we'd never seen before. Juno, Dane called to his AI companion who had integrated herself into our base systems. Analysis. Working, she replied, her holographic form expanding as she processed the new information. It appears to be a communication protocol. The crystal is attempting direct contact. With us, I asked, amazed. In all our months here, the crystal had responded to our actions and provided data, but never initiated communication. Specifically with both of you, Juno clarified. The syntax requires dual species input. It's remarkable. The ancients designed a system that anticipated collaboration between different biological templates. Dane approached the interface terminal, his expression one of wonder. They didn't just anticipate it, they required it. Checks and balances built into the very fabric of their technology. I joined him at the terminal, and together we followed Juno's translations to respond to the crystal's inquiry. As our combined input was accepted, the chamber transformed around us, not physically but virtually, filled with projections so realistic I could almost feel the environments they depicted. We saw Meyhara as it had been at its height, a world of breathtaking beauty where technology and nature existed in perfect harmony. We saw the ancients themselves, a species unlike any in current galactic records, with multiple forms adapted to different ecological niches, yet maintaining a unified consciousness. And we saw what had destroyed them, not an external enemy, as we'd assumed, but a philosophical schism within their own civilization. One faction had wished to share their creation with the galaxy, another had feared exploitation and advocated isolation. The conflict had escalated until the preservationists transformed Meyhara into a fortress, sacrificing its beauty for security. They tore themselves apart, Dane whispered, watching the tragedy unfold across millennia in compressed time, all to protect what they'd created. And in protecting it, they nearly destroyed it, I added, understanding now why the crystal had responded to our cooperation. They lost the balance between preservation and connection. The final images showed us the crystal's current assessment, Meyhara slowly healing, but vulnerable. The ancient defenses were failing as the restoration progressed, creating a dangerous window where the planet would be neither fully protected nor fully healed. When the projections faded, Dane and I stood in silence, processing the implications. The Genesis Consortium will return, he said finally, and they won't be alone. Once word spreads about a functional world seed, every power in the galaxy will want it, I finished, including the Dominion. We faced each other, the weight of responsibility settling over us. The crystal had shared its history and vulnerability not merely as information, but as a plea for protection during its most vulnerable phase. We need allies, Dane decided. Not just defensive measures, but diplomatic connections, legal protections. I nodded slowly, an unprecedented idea forming. The Zari Dominion has treaties with the Earth Coalition. Limited cooperation, primarily non-aggression pacts, but they exist. You're suggesting we formalize Meyhara's status, Dane said, grasping my direction immediately. Create joint stewardship between our species. Neither human nor Zari alone, I confirmed, but both together with the crystal itself as the third party in the arrangement. It was audacious, unprecedented, and possibly our best option. The Dominion wouldn't easily abandon a claim on such technology, but neither would they risk open conflict with Earth and its allies. A formal joint administration would force both sides into cooperation. It won't be easy, Dane cautioned. I've been officially missing for over a year. I have no standing to negotiate for Earth. And I've already demonstrated unusual independence from Dominion protocols, I acknowledged. But we have something more powerful than official standing. What's that? I gestured to our surroundings. The ancient chamber, the crystal, the spreading evidence of Meyhara's revival. Proof, undeniable evidence that cooperation between our species achieves what neither could accomplish alone. Dane smiled, that genuine, unguarded expression that had become increasingly familiar. Kael'Zari, elite hunter of the Zari Dominion, advocating for interspecies cooperation. The galaxy might not be ready for this. They'll adapt, I replied with newfound confidence. If a human and a Zari can find common purpose on a death world, anything is possible. In the days that followed, we formulated our plan. We would use my status to bring Zari representatives to Meyhara, while Juno would transmit key data to Earth authorities through salvaged communication systems. We'd demonstrate the crystal's potential and its vulnerability, presenting our proposal for joint stewardship as the only viable option. It was ambitious, fraught with potential for failure, and entirely contrary to how either of our species is typically operated. But as I watched Dane working beside me, this human who had survived everything Meyhara could throw at him, who had challenged every assumption I'd ever held about his kind, I found myself believing it could work. One evening, as Meyhara's transformed atmosphere created a sunset of breathtaking beauty, we stood together on a newly safe observation platform near the surface. "I never thought I'd see colors like that here," Dane remarked, watching crimson and gold paint the once toxic clouds. "When I first crashed, everything was just variations of death. When I first found you, I thought you were an anomaly," I admitted. "A statistical impossibility, the one human who could survive through sheer luck." He turned to me, curiosity in his expression. "And now I understand that you represent the best of your species, not an exception, but an exemplar." I met his gaze directly. Your adaptability, your curiosity, your capacity for both independence and cooperation. These aren't weaknesses as my people believed. They're different kinds of strength. He seemed surprised by my candor, then smiled. "For what it's worth, you have challenged everything I thought I knew about the Zari too. Your precision, your discipline, your commitment to purpose, but also your capacity to grow beyond rigid thinking, to see value in difference." The crystal pulsed beneath us as if approving our exchange. Perhaps it was. Perhaps the ancients had always intended their creation to bring different perspectives together, to forge connections that transcended biological categories. "Whatever comes next," I said, watching the last light fade from Meyhara's transformed sky, "this world has changed us both." "For the better," Dane added with certainty. And as night fell on a planet that had once been synonymous with death, now slowly becoming a symbol of rebirth, I found myself agreeing with this remarkable human who had taught me that true strength comes in forms I'd never imagined. 1 year after our discovery of the core crystal, the first official joint mission from Earth and the Zari Dominion arrived on Meyhara. They found not the death world of legend, but a planet in transition, deadly still in many regions, but with expanding zones of breathtaking beauty and biodiversity. They found a crystal chamber transformed into a living research center where ancient technology and modern science worked in harmony to guide Meyhara's healing process. And they found 2 individuals who had once represented the height of their respective species' capabilities, a human survivor and a Zari elite, now representing something new, proof that cooperation could achieve what neither species could accomplish alone. The path forward wasn't simple. There were those on both sides who resisted the joint stewardship model, who saw only resources to be claimed or technologies to be controlled. The Genesis Consortium made 3 more attempts to access the crystal, each more sophisticated than the last. But with each challenge, the alliance Dane and I had forged grew stronger. Other species joined the effort, drawn by the unprecedented nature of Meyhara's restoration and the potential it held for healing damaged worlds throughout the galaxy. 5 years after that first meeting in Meyhara's toxic wastelands, I stood with Dane on the newly constructed observation deck of the Interspecies Research Watch Center. Below us stretched a valley that had once been the deadly Singing Fields, now a thriving ecosystem where researchers from a dozen worlds studied the most successful planetary restoration ever documented. "Did you ever imagine this?" Dane asked, gesturing to the activity below. The crystalline lattice on his back had evolved, becoming both a permanent connection to the core and a symbolic representation of his unique status. "Never," I admitted. "When I tracked that anomalous life sign 5 years ago, I expected to find a malfunction in my equipment. At most, perhaps a new species of extremophile. Instead, you found a stubborn human too dumb to die when he was supposed to." "Oh," he finished with a laugh. "I found a teacher," I corrected, surprising us both with my sincerity. "Someone who showed me that strength takes many forms, and that survival is sometimes less about dominating an environment than understanding it." He smiled, no longer the guarded expression of a lonely survivor, but the confident look of someone who had found his purpose. "And I found that even fearsome Zari elite hunters can learn new tricks." As the twin suns set on Meyhara, no longer a death world, but a beacon of interspecies cooperation, I reflected on how far we'd come from that first confrontation. A planet that had once been famous only for its hostility now represented hope throughout the galaxy. All because a human refused to die when he should have, and a Zari was willing to question everything she thought she knew about strength. If you've enjoyed this journey across Meyhara with Kael'Zari and Dane, please consider subscribing to our channel for more original stories, exploring the depths of human resilience and unlikely connections across the stars. Leave a comment below, sharing your favorite moment or what other death worlds you'd like to see us explore in future episodes. Until next time, remember that true strength often comes in forms we least expect.